Hi, and welcome to Book Solve, and another entry in my 100 Great Reads from My Library series. And just before we get into that, I'll change things around a little bit here. This is my to be read pile of books. I've decided, I think, let's have 13. Um, and so I've got 13 books out. I never know which one I'm going to read next when I come to read my next book. It's always, what do I feel like? But it's always from a selection of things that are on the pile. Things might come and go from this list, I guess, at the moment, because I'm doing all women books, all books by women authors this year. These are all those. I've got, and then one of the reasons is I've got two from the Booker long list. Flashlight by Susan Choi and Misinterpretation by Lydia Holger. I think mainly I don't usually do too many from the long list. Usually wait until the short list comes out. But I've got two this time. And down there I've got Hiding Away. What I'm reading at the moment, which is Die My Love by a new author to me, Ariana Harvitz. Yeah. Anyway, oh gosh, that's 1.5 minutes taken up chuntering about something else, but never mind. I do chunter on, don't I? So, book 13 in the series, and it's the first one, probably, that I've had some doubts about including. I sort of need some kind of outside affirmation to convince me entirely that I should have chosen this, because it's a far from easy book to read, and it is a doorstopper too. There's no fewer than 889 pages. So, is it reasonable to include Robert Bolano's 2666? Well, okay. ChatGPT describes it thus. 2666 is Bolaño's magnum opus, a sweeping, posthumously published work of staggering scope. It tackles everything from the elusive nature of truth to the horrors of modern existence, all through 5 interlinked yet tonally distinct parts. The ambition and the scale alone makes it a landmark literary achievement. It's ChatGPT always is very kind and says, "Oh yeah, you're all wonderful." It never goes, "Well, that's a stupid thing to say." So it's nice to call on it. It's like a very obsequious friend, but not always a truthful one. You have to be careful. It does tell you lies. But is that a reason to call it a great read? I have included it though, haven't I? So somehow I'll have to justify that, taking that decision. Well, for one thing, this list is of books that have made some personal impact on me, and sure, I felt that surge of pride at having stuck with such a long book to read it all the way through from page 1 to the end. And 2666 is such a striking novel. It shook me rather when I read it. The book was, as it's already mentioned, published posthumously, and there's no denying that it is a sprawl. It's bleak to some extent. It's intelligent. Yeah, definitely. It's digressive, shooting off in unexpectedly in different directions to Mexico, Germany, Spain, and the United States. And the quasi-mystical figure of an elusive German author named Archimboldi haunts the narrative. The most famous and the most demanding section of the book is the tough slog of reading fictionalized accounts of hundreds of murders of women in the Mexican border city of Santa Rosa, which is modeled on the real city of Ciudad Juarez. And this daunting recitation takes up over 280 pages, and it constitutes a bleak meditation on systemic violence. Um, Also on the apathy of both the public and the state, and his comment on breakdown of meaning in modern society, I think. Um, and it's hard going, solely because of the repetitive nature of the grisly accounts, and you feel helpless and despondent in the face of such a litany of violence from which you're not allowed to turn away. Um, And let's go through the different sections of the novel, I think, to give you some idea of what's going on in these 800 pages. At the beginning of the novel, the reader's introduced to four European literary critics: Pelletier, who's French, Espinosa, who's Spanish, Norton, who's British, and Marini, who's Italian. And they built their academic careers around the study of this aforementioned elusive German author named Benno von Archimboldi. Um, and initially, the writing's witty, intellectual, digressive, and it's filled with musings on literature, on love, on ego. And the structure seems tightly organised and character driven, with plenty of dry humour. And we're tempted to believe that the work will be some kind of sly critique of academia with the focus on interpersonal dynamics, literary jealousies between these three characters. But um, when they discover that Archimboldi may be living in Santa Teresa in Mexico, it looks as though the story is going to bloom into a detective story. So here's an example of the writing from this early section of the novel. The three of them met a few years later at a literary congress in Bremen. Although Pelletier and Espinosa had already met in Paris, neither of them had met Norton. Pelletier thought she was lovely. Espinosa, too, thought she was lovely. Norton was older than she looked, and this struck Espinosa as odd. Usually the reverse was true. And in any case, they all got along splendidly, and their subject was Archimboldi, who was still alive and writing, although no one knew where. They didn't know where he lived, and they didn't know his real name, although there was plenty of speculation. It was as if he were two writers, or four, or 20, or 100. His style was unmistakable, but in his books he used different names and gave the impression of being many people. And this, instead of complicating matters, simplified them. Or at least that was Espinosa's opinion. Well, now we're well invested in their quest, and we've heard, merely as a minor note, about the violent attacks on the women. But in the second part of the book, we are introduced to a new character, Oscar Almafitano, a Chilean philosophy professor living in Santa Teresa. And he briefly appears at the end of the first part as a local academic, um, and he gets involved helping the critics. But in this second part, he's the protagonist. He's an isolated man. He's disillusioned. He's increasingly disturbed by his surroundings, the violence around him, and the fear for the safety of his daughter, Rosa. And we start listening now to his inner dialogue, which becomes increasingly more fragmented and neurotic. I suppose, mirroring the breakdown of society in Santa Teresa. He was thinking about his daughter, about how she was growing up. He was thinking about the stupid things he'd done in his life and his wife's betrayal, about the books he hadn't read and how difficult it was to live in Mexico, even in the north, in a city like Santa Teresa that had grown chaotically with no urban planning, a city without a head, with a sewer system but no map of the sewer system, and yet still a city, with hotels and supermarkets and trash pickup and thousands of students at the university, many of them from Mexico City and other places further south. Students who sometimes ended up murdered in the desert. students who dropped out, students who lost their minds, students who watched the days go by and waited and slept or picked up and left. And another section, he began to feel that he was slipping outside the grasp of sanity. His brain still worked. He could still mark exams, attend departmental meetings, follow the thread of a book. But a secret longing was to be lost was taking hold of him, a taste for dark omens, for geometry hung from clotheslines, for sleep without dreams, for the smell of abandoned places, and for silence. Now, in part 3, we're introduced to another character, Oscar Fate, an African-American journalist from Harlem who works for an obscure magazine. And his real name is Quincy Williams, but he goes by Fate. And he's been assigned to cover a boxing match in Santa Teresa after a colleague dies unexpectedly. And Fate arrives in Santa Teresa expecting to write a sports story, but he's gradually pulled into the shadows of the murders and the city's pervasive violence through his acquaintance with a boxing promoter. And he starts an uneasy relationship with Rosa Amalfitano, and also he hears about the femicides, and Fate's conflicted when he realises how big this story is about the murders. He doesn't know whether to intervene, to report, or perhaps to flee. Fate's an outsider in Mexico, and with his own profession, and within his own profession, both. He's a black man writing for a white audience, and he's confronting violence that others seem to ignore. In this section, there's a scene of a nightmarish dinner with Mexican intellectuals where gender and politics and violence and literature and intermingle in a very disquieting scene. The fourth and next part, the one about the crimes, it drops a very dry, journalistic, detached tone, as if it were, and it's as if we were members of a jury, forced to listen to every shred of evidence that's forthcoming from over 100 murders, and that we are held by law to attend to all, every bit of it, and to consider it carefully. That is the very onerous civic duty that we're given, and in this case, as a reader, it takes our toll. Here's an example of just a few of them. On January the 5th, 1994, the body of Florita Almada, aged 13, was found in a vacant lot near the San Pedro River. She'd been raped and strangled. Her face showed signs of having been beaten with fists. The body was identified by her mother. On February 17, the body of Jessica de la Peña, a maquiladora worker, was discovered near the highway to Hermosillo. She had been shot twice in the head. The forensic report indicated signs of sexual assault. No suspects were identified. On March 8, the police found the half-buried body of Andrea Cervantes, aged 22, in a patch of desert behind a truck stop. She'd been missing for 2 weeks. The cause of death was strangulation. There were signs of torture. She had been bound with wire. The body of Alicia Ferrell, aged 16, was discovered by 2 boys flying kites near the old slaughterhouse. She'd been raped and stabbed multiple times. Her eyes had been gouged out post-mortem. And there's lots of that, and it's, tough. And then the novel switches back to focus on Benno van Archimboldi, and we learn his real name, which is Hans Reuter, and we're told of his past as a German soldier in World War II and of his indirect connections to the murders of the women in Santa Teresa. And rather than offering closure or resolution, Bolano instead widens the scope and turning to the deep past and focusing on how a single human life, marked by war and exile and books, threads into the chaos of the modern world. Um, the structure of the book, it resists any kind of conventional narrative payoff. There's no solving the crimes, no justice, no reunion of characters. And instead, the final part offers a meditation on memory and history. And the whole work is a tragic reflection on the 20th century, encompassing the themes of evil, disappearance, art, literature, and ultimately oblivion. Do we look away, engage, accept the consequences, admit our complicity, our despair, that our cowardice, our ambivalence, our impotence? Well, 2666 is such a powerful book and was very much a milestone in my reading life that I couldn't but include it on this list of 100 great reads. And that's it from Booksolve. So all it leaves me to do is to say goodbye and happy reading to you all.